And we're ready to go.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Tim Voss, and I'm the chair of the Historic Conservation Board. I'd like to take a minute to remind everyone about the rules of this proceeding. This proceeding is at all times governed by the rules of procedure adopted by the board on September 26, 2011, amended March 23, 2015, and last amended March 9, 2020. A copy of the rules of procedure is available for review online. All those planning to testify today, which does not include those solely making arguments such as attorneys, will be asked to take an oath administered by the board's attorney when they testify. This is a quasi-judicial hearing, and as such, the board reserves the right to deliberate in private. The rules of evidence do not apply to this hearing. However, professional rules of conduct do apply, and candor to the tribunal is required. The board members are citizen volunteers and are not paid for their service. They are treated as public officials under Ohio law. Any attempt to influence them, including but not limited to bribery, intimidation, retaliation, which may include contacting their employer in an attempt to exert influence, is punishable as a crime. All should be aware that this meeting is being tape recorded. Therefore, please speak clearly into your microphone and state your name and address for the record. In the event of any technical difficulties with the video conferencing technology, I may continue or postpone this hearing at my discretion. All participants providing testimony must have both camera and audio features turned on in order to participate. To ensure that we have a quorum, I would like to take attendance. When each board member hears their name, please let me know that you are on the call. Tom Sunderman.
Here.
Herb Weiss. Pam Smith Dobbins. I'm sorry, was that you, Herb?
Yeah.
Okay. Pam Smith Dobbins.
Here.
Bob Zelasco.
Here.
Allison McKenzie. Ian Seamers. We have 5 members present. We have a quorum. All right. With that, we will proceed to the first item. Item number 1, 48 Clifton Avenue. Ms. Ahaus.
Good afternoon. Let me share my screen. Okay, so item number 1 is 48 East Clifton Avenue, also known as 59 Peat Street. The applicant is Christopher Michael Holmes, LLC, and the property owner is James and Courtney Swagger. The zoning is RM 0.7, and it's also located in the Over the Rhine Historic District and a Hillside Overlay District. The request before you is a certificate of appropriateness and zoning relief for the construction of a new single-family home on a currently vacant lot. You can see the specific zoning relief that's requested is a hillside review to allow excavation and fill of approximately 17 feet, which exceeds the 8-foot limit in the zoning code. Here you can see a Google Earth Street View photo along Peat Street. This is the existing condition of the parcel. And if you look, you can see the parcel map here. It's the property with the red star on it. This is a double frontage lot fronting both East Clifton Avenue and Peat Street. And this block of Clifton and Peat doesn't have a consistent pattern in which side of the street is the main frontage. And during our review, we looked at the 1891 and 1934 Sanborn maps, and those show that development really did front both streets historically. You can see the topography lines on this parcel map. This property is in the Hillside District, and there is approximately 34 feet of elevation change from East Clifton to Peat Street. So really any development of the site would require this additional hillside review and relief. And when we look at the hillside review and the zoning relief they're requesting, the majority of the zoning considerations are satisfied, with the exception of the hillside excavation and fill. The building addition fits within the maximum building envelope, which you can see demonstrated on this side elevation view. And here you can see in blue the amount of excavation and fill that would be permitted by right. In the red is the additional amount, which is requiring the hearing today. The applicant has worked with the Hillside Trust, and based on their recommendation, that is part of the reason that the building being set towards Peat Street, as it's been determined that that's going to provide the best quality and the least disturbance of the hillside. So that's, again, why it's being oriented to Peat rather than Clifton. But when we look at the design overall with the hillside standards, going back to the foundation, it doesn't leave cliff-like vertical slopes or excessively high retaining walls. It fits into the hillside rather than changing the hillside to fit the building. You can see that in the stepping of the foundation and the height with the hillside. The design was completed with the intent of minimizing the excavation and fill required. The largest single cut is on the peat side, and that's approximately 12 feet. The excavation and fill is not going to affect the overall topography, views, or vegetation. They've clustered the development on one side of the lot and are retaining as much of the existing landscaping and tree coverage as possible. And with the design, there's still going to be a clear sense of the hillside, and the views will not be impacted. You can see that they had additional height that they could have developed, and they kept the height lower than is permitted. When we look at the certificate of appropriateness review for the infill design, you had a full analysis in your staff report. But generally, our finding is that the design substantially conforms to the Conservation District guidelines. This lot's currently vacant and unimproved. The infill design doesn't replicate the existing buildings, but it uses materials, massing, and rhythm of the historic district to influence the design choices. When we look, this is the main elevation fronting Peat Street. They've used brick on the main elevation. You can see on the left side that they wrapped the corner with the brick, and then the rear of the building is a siding material. They do 2 stories on Peat Street, which is consistent with the streetscape, and then build into the hillside, so it goes down for an additional level of lower living space. There's a gently sloped roof. There's the clear sense of base, midsection, and cap on the design. The windows on the main elevation are punched openings in a vertical orientation. As we get further to the rear, there's some deviation from this, but those are the less visible elevations. Overall, the rhythm, massing, and height are consistent with what we see on the streetscape. And they did incorporate garage door openings on the first floor of the Peat Street elevation, which is not something we always see in historic buildings. But they've done this in a sympathetic way and responded to staff feedback by doing 2 distinct garage doors rather than one large 2-car garage opening. This is the rear elevation of the building. I think it's important to note that this is set back 43 feet from Clifton, so there is some deviation with the doors and the materials on the rear, but the landscaping is going to be maintained, and this is not immediately abutting the street view. This property did have a pre-hearing on February 3rd. The applicant was the only member in attendance. We got 1 email from a neighbor, John Wilson, which was included in your staff report package for your review. And overall, we are recommending approval of the project. Looking at the zoning relief, we're recommending approval of the hillside review for excavation in excess of the 8-foot limit, with the following condition, that the curb cut and access drive are limited to no greater than 20 feet in width. And this is just sort of a cleanup condition, as we noticed on the site plan, that as it's currently drawn, the driveway exceeds the maximum permitted width. We've talked to the applicant about this, and they're amenable, and they will revise that to conform prior to coming in for permitting. We just wanted to clarify that on the record. We're making the finding of the zoning relief that it's consistent with 1435-092, that the property owner has demonstrated by credible evidence that the proposal substantially conforms to the applicable conservation guidelines, and that the building, while contemporary, has taken its cues from the neighboring contributing buildings with a strong base, middle, top, brick material, vertical emphasis, individual punched double hung windows, and a strong contextual rhythm. And then when we look at the certificate of appropriateness review, staff is also recommending approval of the design of a single-family home at 48 Clifton, 59 Pete, with one condition, and that is that the building permits must be issued within 2 years of the decision date, or the certificate of appropriateness shall expire. That's our standard condition. We made this finding on 1435-092, that the property owner has demonstrated by credible evidence that the proposal substantially conforms to the applicable conservation guidelines. The building, while contemporary, has taken its cues from the neighboring contributing buildings with a strong base, middle, top, brick material, vertical emphasis, individual punch double hung windows, and a strong contextual rhythm. I'm happy to answer any questions on the staff report and recommendation.
Thank you very much. And do we have the applicant?
We do. I'm Chris Cavins of Christopher Michael Homes.
Okay. What would you like to add that Ms. Ahouse has not told us?
Quite honestly, she covered it pretty efficiently, and I appreciate that. I just want to say thank you to the board and obviously Beth Johnson, who worked with me on countless times to make sure we did fit into the historic guidelines.
Okay. Do you have anything else to add?
Well, there was a letter that was issued.
Mr.
I'm
Cavins,
sorry.
I hate to interrupt. If we are going to get into more of the content, I'll just have to swear you in. So if you could raise your right hand for me. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, there was a letter that was sent to the board, which we appreciated, and it had some concerns regarding the landscape off of Clifton, the home appearing to be floating. Part of what we did discuss with Beth as well as Eric from Hillside Trust is we're going to leave all of the trees, as much greenery on Clifton as we can, to in essence keep the same fabric of Clifton Avenue that currently exists and put everything up on Peach Street. He thought that would be the least evasive, I guess, for the hillside itself. And obviously having all that greenery stay there, the trees and this underbrush, it'll help hide the rear of the homes, because this is one of somewhere between 5 and 7 of these homes that's going to become a cool little enclave up there on Peach Street.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jim Swagger?
I'm here.
Do you have anything that you'd like to add?
No, I don't think so.
All right. Courtney Swagger?
Hi, I'm here.
Would you like to add anything?
No, just that Jim and I are excited to build and become city dwellers. We're really looking forward to it. And we appreciate everybody's help as we've been going through this process. Really appreciate it. It's been a learning, and we're really excited to finally get down there.
Okay. There are no other people signed up that are here. Are there any questions from the board for either the staff or applicant? Okay, then I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to approve both the zoning relief and the certificate of appropriateness as laid out by staff.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Mr. Zelasco.
Yes.
Ms. Smith Dobbins.
Yes.
Mr. Weiss.
Yes.
Mr. Sunderman.
Yes.
The chair votes aye. The motion passes. That brings us to item number 2, 2001 Auburn Avenue. Ms. Ahouse.
Okay, so for 2001 Auburn Avenue, we have co-applicants of the St. Francis Group and the Port of Greater Cincinnati. The owner is currently the Hamilton County Land Utilization Corporation, also commonly known as the Land Bank. This property is located in the CNM zoning district in the Auburn Avenue Historic District. What's before you today is a COA to demolish the contributing structure located on this property, and they're seeking demolition through an economic hardship claim that the reuse of the building cannot create an economic return on the investment due to the deteriorated condition of the building. So you can see the location. This is at the northwest corner of the intersection of Auburn Avenue and Dorchester Street. And here's the site plan provided by the applicant with a little more detail. The applicant also provided extensive exterior photos in their application materials. The building's a one-story Mediterranean Revival building constructed in 1927. It's located in the Auburn Avenue Historic District, which is both locally designated and listed in the National Register of Historic Places. And this district was designated to recognize Mount Auburn as the first suburban residential community in Cincinnati that relied on downtown for its industry and commerce. Its built environment illustrates the historic development patterns of the city, and particularly our Hillside neighborhoods. It contains a series of notable buildings which represent a variety of architectural styles constructed from approximately 1839 to the turn of the century. And they really, in this collection, they continue to convey that sense of time and place in the city's history. So as we're all aware, a historic district recognizes the collection of buildings rather than the individual significance of every building. And this building is considered a contributing building to the district as a whole. But when we look at the combination of buildings in this district, this isn't one of the most monumental or character-defining buildings within the district. And here you can see some additional exterior views and detailing that the applicant provided. And these are the interior photos provided by the applicant, which show the existing condition. And you have a full analysis according to all of the demolition guidelines in your staff report. We start by noting that emergency demolition has not been ordered by the Director of Buildings and Inspections for reasons of public safety, so this demolition is not proceeding under that criteria. But you can see the existing condition from this photo collection that the applicant provided. There's also an extensive history of code enforcement activity that was provided in your packet. Multiple notices of violation have been sent to the property. And in the early to mid 2000s, there was a fire here. In 2007, the city issued a notice of violation. And that notice of violation notes that fire has damaged the roof and roof covering, leaving the building exposed to the weather. The cornice is damaged and needs paint. The interior is inaccessible and the fire line is still in place. It's neither habitable nor safe for human occupancy. The roof no longer performs its intended function. This has not been remedied and repaired. The most recent notice of violation, which is also in your packet for historic, dangerous, and unsafe building, still notes the fire damage, the building being exposed to weather and vermin, and that it's neither habitable nor safe for human occupancy. There have been no permits to improve the condition since the 2007 violation. And it's important to note there have been multiple owners since the fire. The current owner has only taken ownership since 2019. And so when we look at the conservation guidelines for demolition, this is seeking approval under number 2. And that is that the owner can demonstrate to the satisfaction of the Historic Conservation Board the structure cannot be reused, nor can a reasonable economic return be gained from the use of all or part of the building proposed for demolition. And so the way we evaluate the reasonable economic return approvals is we look to 1435-092 of the zoning code, which lays out under a certificate of appropriateness the standards for review for economic hardship. So there's 3 main questions in this analysis that the board is looking at today. The first, will all economically viable use of the property be deprived without approval of the certificate of appropriateness? And when we look at that, Question, the applicant provided extensive pro forma analysis in their packet. They looked at the redevelopment of the building for 14 different permitted uses in that economic analysis. And each analysis produces a negative cash-on-cash return on investment. The pro forma analysis also contemplated receiving state and federal tax credits, even though those are competitive and uncertain at the state level. So it did include that funding as one of the sources. Overall, though, the small scale of the building, the prolonged period of neglect, and the environmental contamination, because there was previously a dry cleaner used here, are all factors that increase the cost for redevelopment. It's important to note the port received 3 formal applications for the redevelopment of this building, in addition to what you're seeing move forward today. Each of those was subsequently withdrawn based on the high redevelopment cost. The Department of Community and Economic Analysis, conducted an independent analysis of the applicant's materials and the potential redevelopment of the building. What they did is they looked at 3 different scenarios for redevelopment of the building, and that analysis was provided in your packet. They concluded the project would not be financially feasible to redevelop the historic building if the COA for demolition is denied. So all 3 scenarios that DCED looked at produced a net operating income that's too low to attract the debt needed to make the project financially feasible. Their analysis notes the only way for the applicant to proceed with any of the above scenarios would be to fill the investment gap with developer equity. The equity return, cash on cash, for all 3 scenarios is also too low to attract the necessary private capital to proceed with the project. Finally, in all 3 scenarios, the project stabilized fair market value is less than the total investment required to renovate the property, meaning the project creates negative value over time. So DCED's analysis concludes the denial of the COA would deprive the property of its economic use, would result in sustained vacancy and blight, and it would decrease the overall well-being of the Mount Auburn neighborhood, by extension, the city. So that's the analysis for item number 1 that we're looking at. When we go to item number 2, that's really looking at the reasonable investment-backed expectations for the applicant. The port didn't acquire this property with the intention of demolition, so that's important to note. They came to that conclusion after collaboration with stakeholders, the neighborhood, and reviewing 4 formal applications for the property's redevelopment. Their acquisition, initially it was mission-based, facilitating the revitalization of the neighborhood of Mount Auburn, renewing commercial corridors in our city. So they identified this building as a target because it was vacant, dangerous, unproductive, and contributing to the devaluation of the Mount Auburn neighborhood, detracting from the overall quality of life. They're seeking demolition only after reviewing multiple potential means of redevelopment, which included the analysis provided in your packets, looking at 14 different permitted uses, and reaching the conclusion that redevelopment is not economically viable. And finally, when we looked at question number 3, whether the economic hardship was created or exacerbated by the property owner, the economic hardship was not created or exacerbated by the current property owner. There's currently no income generated by the property. It's been declared by the city to be not safe for human occupancy. There was extensive analysis of the feasible reuse alternative by the applicant, as well as the city's Department of Community and Economic Development. The lack of maintenance occurred prior to the 2019 acquisition by the port. And since that time, they spent over $2,600 on maintenance and just securing the property while they worked on a redevelopment plan. The applicant did not deliberately neglect maintenance, which brought us to this point. And they've also, it's important to note, they've explored available incentives and funding in their economic analysis of reuse. So as I mentioned before, they've looked at how tax credits would impact their overall economic ability to redevelop the building. So there was a pre-hearing. The applicant was the only attendee at the pre-hearing. We didn't have any members of the community there. We received 1 letter of support for the project, And that should have been emailed to the board members today. It was received after the packets went out. And this was from the Mount Auburn Community Development Corporation, from Carol Gibbs, supporting the demolition of the building. And as we look at our neighborhood plans and how this project is consistent with them, we have to acknowledge it's not consistent with Plan Cincinnati, which asks that we preserve our built history. But when we look at the more neighborhood-specific Auburn Avenue Corridor Strategic Development Plan, which is from 2017, it's important to note that that plan identifies this corner as a key corner for infill redevelopment. So staff is recommending approval. It's staff's analysis that the applicants provided credible evidence that they cannot reuse the building and that a reasonable economic return cannot be gained from the use of all or part of the building. I think it's important to note you have the Department of Community and Economic Development's analysis in your packets. They recommended that a demolition permit be withheld until a formal development plan is submitted and approved by the city. But based on the CNN zoning district and the Auburn Avenue Historic District conservation guidelines, we don't find that the board has the authority to withhold issuance of a demolition permit pending redevelopment approval, as long as you find that it meets the conservation guidelines and the COA standards in the zoning code. So we're recommending approval of the COA to demolish the building, and making the finding that per section 1435.092, the property owner has demonstrated by credible evidence that the proposal substantially conforms to the applicable conservation guidelines, and the applicant and or the property owner has demonstrated by credible evidence the property owner will suffer economic hardship if the certificate of appropriateness is not approved. So I'm happy to answer any questions. That's my presentation.
Thank you. All right, who do we have speaking on behalf of the applicant?
My name is John Back. I'm the director of the St. Francis Group.
All right, Mr. Beck, would you raise your right hand and be sworn in, please?
Do you solemnly swear the testimony you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, what do you have to add?
I not too much. I think that was an excellent summary by Ms. Ahouse, and I certainly appreciate not only the thoroughness of the summary there, but the help that we received as an applicant, putting our application together, and the objective review that staff has done of our application. I kind of just want to add a little bit of color. St. Francis Group and our sister company, Nair Holdings, we're at our base preservationists. We were in front of you guys, in front of the board last month for the Flatiron Building, which is a project we're currently undertaking. So any ask of demolition, we take extremely seriously. And so it was quite a long and detailed process, going through these 14 different scenarios after we identified that those were the acceptable uses by the zoning code. And just time after time, the condition of the building, the years of neglect, and just its size seemed to indicate that this was not a building that was worth preserving. I don't know that maybe Ms. Ahouse touched on it a bit in her report there, but the other portion I wanted to touch on was this particular building is really not a significant building when it comes to the character of the district of Auburn Avenue. It's a much later building. It's a much more auto-centric sort of building. So that was another sort of indication that we, I guess, came to that this would be a good candidate for a site for total redevelopment. I guess finally, I would add that we've had a lot of really great relationships with the community, and certainly this corner is an important part of the plans the community has for themselves, for the neighborhood. And we certainly believe that it deserves the highest and best use. And that's not a single story retail storefront. So again, very much appreciate staff's time and their analysis, and appreciate you hearing our comments today.
Thank you very much. All right, we have a number of people signed up, but I'd like to give the board members an opportunity to ask the applicant or staff questions at this point. Do we have any questions or comments from the board?
I have a question for Mr. Beck. You're asking us to tear down a historic building. Have you any thought on what it is you're actually going to do if we grant this? What is it you're going to do with this land?
Yes, we have definitely had some thought on that, and we are actively working with the port. The port is the current owner of the site, and they have, of course, rights to approve or deny our proposed development plans. I can tell you very broadly that right now we're working on a mixed-use development that would include retail, as well as a very large residential component and some parking as well. But again, that's something that has to be approved by the port because of they're a very mission-based organization, and I know Bill Fisher is here as well. He could talk a little bit about that process for you as well. But they, their goal and our control of this property is based on producing something that will be a great benefit to the community up there.
Further questions?
John, does the land bank, has it already acquired land surrounding the property? I didn't remember seeing a property survey. It looks like the property is about 1/10 of an acre, about the size of the building. Is that the extent?
Yes. Yes. This property is just that corner there. There are some other additional vacant properties. If you look at the sort of the photographic survey that we did, those are also being considered as well.
Do you have control of any of that other property yet that you can share?
No, not right now.
Okay, thank you. No, you can't share. No, you don't have.
I think that's
That'll
all right.
work. Thank you.
I guess I have one question, and that is typically, okay, I know this property well, and I don't question, but that there is a valid economic argument, but typically the board has been reticent to allow demolition without a follow-on plan. This is directed both at staff and the applicant. Why is this time sensitive relative to taking down a historic structure? Let's start with Ms. Ahouse.
Yeah, less so, as to why it's time sensitive to take down the historic structure. But I think the most recent demolition requests that we've seen are in the downtown development zoning district. And that zoning district does require a permit to be in for new development before any demolition can be approved. So in part, it's because this is a different zoning district that doesn't require that redevelopment plan to issue the demolition approval.
I'm not questioning whether we have an obligation or a legal mandate, but I don't know that direction in the downtown district is necessarily a bad thing. I have some hesitation to approve, certainly, and I get the limitations on contributing, but this is a technically contributing building, and we're being asked to move it forward at this pace ahead of a follow-on plan, whether we're allowed to do that or have to do that. I'm just questioning why now. So, Mr. Back, why now?
Yeah, maybe I can, I'll do my best to answer that. I think, the St. Francis Group and Nair Holdings are, they're businesses. They're for-profit development companies. And the sort of economic impact studies that we've done are accurate. If this building can't be demolished, there's really no development project there. It will not produce a return on investment. So, I think any good business is about weighing risk and reward and managing cash flow. And if there's not a project to be done there, then we feel it's not a good business decision to spend money on engineering, design. Ms. Ahouse mentioned there is a environmental condition on the property from the former dry cleaners.
Dry cleaner.
There. That's not only going to take more cleanup money, but that's going to take more environmental engineering money. So professional services fees, all of those things. The first step is to determine if we are able to build, to take this building down so that there can be an economically feasible project built there.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to piggyback off of your question. I guess I'm concerned too. Is there a project there without the acquisition of the other properties? Because I think that's, to me, when Tim brought that up, it's like we're being asked to take a building down on an individual site. Is the site developable by itself if everything else doesn't come together? Or are we just going to lose a building?
I personally believe that there is a project there just at that corner. What that project looks like would be a different project than what we are currently contemplating. But that is, our focus is not just on the Flatiron building. It is on that intersection, that gateway to Mount Auburn. And so, that corner that building sits on just by itself is extremely important to that overall project. And that's how we view it. We view this as a greater project than just one building or two buildings. It's the intersection. It's the gateway.
Thank you. I'd like to go ahead and run through the other people that are signed up, and then we'll come back around. William Fisher.
Yes, good afternoon. So Bill Fisher, I'm
Need to have you sworn in, Mr. Fisher.
okay.
Can you please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear the testimony you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes. So I'm Bill Fisher, the Vice President of Community Development with the Port Authority and our managed entity, the Land Bank. So I don't think I have to go into too much detail. Most people know what the port does, but we are typically the owner of last resort. So this property, as many of our properties do, come to us at the request of community or the city building and inspections department, where it's been neglected for a long time. Our goal is never to tear down these buildings. Our first goal is to assess them for a reuse. And if the reuse is important enough to it. So like the Flatiron building next door, that was a very significant building. We knew that wasn't going to come down. We had to put money into that. Unfortunately, sometimes we get the buildings too late, like on Highland Avenue. And I think everybody saw on the news where we were just a day away from stabilizing a building that was very significant to the community and the city, and really hoped to have saved that. And we had great visions. We were very excited about that redevelopment that unfortunately we got to it too late. So, but this building is not one of those. We assessed it. We wanted to see if we were requested from the city building department to try to take this project on. We did try to find end users for it, but it is the foundation has gigantic holes in it. The roof is, as Emily said, is is not there. So it's been neglected for so long, and it's such a small building that this is not a building that we can see our very, very limited resources investing anything into. So that after we couldn't find a reuse for it, then we talked to a developer. Obviously, the St. Francis Group that's working on the Flatiron Building is been a great partner with us on the Flatiron Building, as they have in other buildings. And so looking at an infill project on this site was really the only thing we have left. The one comment I will add to what Ms. Ahouse said earlier, the Department of Community and Economic Development were asking for holding until they had a redevelopment plan. And I can just say that's also our goal. So we partner with the Department of Community and Economic Development. So we don't sell property unless we are convinced that a redevelopment will take place. So it's a little different than a private entity applicant. We're not going to just sell the property. We're going to wait for the right project to come along. So that's it.
Okay. Tom Nyer.
Sir Nyer, can you raise your right hand?
Yeah, okay.
Do you solemnly swear the testimony you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do, thank you. Good afternoon. Thanks very much to the board for your time again today. As Mr. Beck mentioned, we have been in front of you a couple of times recently, and there's probably more to come. I thought maybe I would just touch on a couple of the questions that have been raised by the board members in this hearing, because they're actually quite related. As Bill said, absent a project, the land bank is not going to work with us on this asset. We have a number of projects that I hope you understand we don't necessarily want to go into in a public forum. But if it is just this site, then that is project A. If it's this project and other adjacent properties, that's project B. It could be project C or D, depending on what else is going on in the community. But it's very much our expectation to work collaboratively with the community and put forth a project that is contextual and catalytic, so that we can help the Mount Auburn community move forward. We have a range of conversations with Carol Gibbs, who I know is on here right now. And one of the things that she's asking us to do is get moving, generate some momentum. We've been talking about redeveloping Mount Auburn for a decade now, and it's time for us to get going. I think the hearing that we're contemplating today is, the action that we're contemplating today is a critical first step in that process.
Thank you. Brian Agawa.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. Bill Fisher covered it.
Okay. Carol Gibbs.
Carol, we just need you to unmute. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
What do you have to add?
I think most of everything I could say has been said, except that I would like to repeat that our Auburn Avenue quarter plan, which was approved by City Council in 2017, shows this as the gateway to our neighborhood business district, which is very important. And the other is that Mr. Nyer is right. I am a nag, and many of you here know that.
No.
Let the record say I did not say nag, just for the record.
The record is clear.
Thank you, Mr.
All right. Anything else, Ms. Gibbs?
That's all, Mr. Voss.
Thank you. Cody Brooks.
No, I have nothing further to add other than to thank the board for their time, and we look forward to working with the community.
Pete Lahaney.
Pete Lonnie. I'm just here for questions if anybody has any.
All right. That is everybody we have signed up. I do have one other question of staff. Whatever goes back in here will have to come back before the board. Is that correct, Ms. Ahouse?
Yes, that's correct. The new infill construction will come back to the board.
All right. Other questions or comments from the board? All right. I actually, in this case, I looked rather extensively at the economic argument. I think it is a valid argument. My only concern is that we get only partway into this and we just have an empty lot sitting there. But in my opinion, regardless, that building is not a architectural gem that is bringing much. As long as we don't have a parking lot show up there, I think I'm comfortable moving forward. But any other questions or comments from board members?
I would just like to say that I agree with you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a little hesitant. We have always asked for a plan before we allowed a building to come down. This building is not in danger of falling down, apparently. I will grant you, I went up and looked at it, and I'm not surprised that there's no economic use for this building. So I would guess that given that this is just one part of an overall plan, I'll go along with this, but I don't think we should make this a habit or a
Precedent.
A precedent. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions or comments? I will entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the certificate of appropriateness as laid out by staff.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Mr. Zelasco,
Aye.
Ms. Smith Dobbins,
Yes.
Mr. Weiss,
Aye.
Mr. Sunderman.
Aye.
The chair votes aye. Item number 2 is approved. This brings us to item number 3. Mr. Owen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This application is for the renovation and addition for an existing building at 247 Renner Street. This is within the Soane Mohawk Historic District, and the applicant is proposing to renovate the existing single-family residence that will include a new rooftop addition for an additional third-floor living space. It will basically expand the existing 2-bedroom house to a 3-bedroom. The addition on the top will take the form of a mansard roof with a roof deck placed behind the new third-floor addition. The applicant is also proposing new windows throughout, new doors, and possibly a new hardy fiber cement siding to the existing exterior of the building, although I should note the owner has noted that the existing asbestos siding may remain in place and be painted if it is found to be in good condition. The building did recently have a permit approved at the staff level for rear decks and an interior renovation. So this is the next step in that renovation process. All right, so viewing the screen here, this is the property here in the orangish pink color. These are the existing conditions of the building. And this is the existing rear yard of the building, with the building in the center, existing retaining walls, and noting the topographic change in the backyard. So these are the proposed plans from the front elevation, a little bit light, but I hope you can make this out on the screen. So this is the existing building here with the proposed mansard roof addition on the top. So I will note, being in the Soane Mohawk Historic District, this district is a little bit different from some of our others in that the district is basically separated into 2 separate zones. There's zone 1, which has a higher standard for new construction, and these are mainly the large monumental type buildings that are found within the district. And then there is also zone 2, which the subject property is found in zone 2. And that zone 2 area notes that more design latitude will be given to new construction. Greater latitude is given in Zone 2 to encourage the inclusion of great contemporary architecture that is inspired by and that complements the existing historic structures. So this property is in Zone 2. So we'll start with the proposed rooftop addition. So the guidelines do note that room additions to historic buildings are permitted on the side and the rear of the building, and they may only be added to the top of the building if the addition will not be seen from ground level. The habitable space addition will not result in the building being taller than the tallest adjacent structure. So I'd note that obviously as a mansard roof addition is proposed, it will be visible from the street. There is a provision later on where it speaks to preserving the character of existing roof styles. This building does have a flat roof currently. Obviously, that would be changed with the mansard roof placed on top, although it will still retain that flat surface on the top of the mansard roof as well as the rear roof deck. So that section on the roof also speaks to the fact that if you're building an addition to the top of the building, it should be at least 40 feet back from the street, which is not an option on this property. It is a very small lot at 20 feet wide, and the existing building is only 35 feet deep. So basically the applicant has two options for an addition. Either it could be built on the rear or on the top. So the problem with the rear is that this is a hillside area with steep topography in the backyard, as you can see from that previous picture, which also has the existing retaining walls throughout the backyard. So to build an addition in the back, other than the hillside issues, it would also have to be placed up off of the ground level in order to meet the existing floor plans of the stories in front. So it's not as practical to build in the rear yard owing to those circumstances. So considering those conditions and the fact that this is in a Zone 2 area, which has a slightly lower standard than the Zone 1, staff does feel that the mansard roof addition would generally be appropriate in this area. There are other second empire structures found throughout the district that have similar mansard roofs. So staff does feel that this would be appropriate. It's would not overpower the original building. The existing cornice line would remain in place, and the addition would be built above that cornice. So the cladding material on the mansard roof, we should also mention, the applicant is proposing a Novik shingle that is a vinyl product. So typically vinyl would not be something that is encouraged in historic districts. Staff does feel that with the small amount of siding that would be placed on the front portion of the mansard roof, that this could be considered appropriate. Whether or not the board wants to discuss an alternate material, that is up for debate. So, but generally staff feels that that with this vinyl material, it would be something that would not be highly noticeable as vinyl, and it would be only placed at the top portion of the building on the front slope of that mansard roof. Let's see, aside from the rooftop deck, the main changes are going to be the replacement windows. So the existing building, the windows are in a state of advanced deterioration. The windows on this building are actually used as an example of the advanced deterioration in the conservation guidelines. The guidelines do note that the expense of repairing or restoring key windows where possible will be taken into favorable consideration in the approval of window materials. So that being said, the applicant has agreed to put in aluminum clad wood windows on the front facade. He is asking permission to use a vinyl window product on the rear. And this basically, this would be a custom built vinyl window by Vinyl Max. And it would be in a dark color as far as the frame goes, dark bronze or a black. So it would mimic somewhat a historic window. And being on the rear elevation, these windows would not be visible from any of the surrounding streets. They would be placed within the existing openings that are surrounded by that roof deck. So that will help further screen those windows. So owing to the fact that the windows have already been purchased and they are able to be made in a dark color, staff feels that being on the rear elevation, somewhat screened by the decks, this could be an acceptable location for a vinyl window if approved by the board. Other than those, the main other change on the building, the existing breezeway that currently accesses the rear is proposed to be filled in. So staff does not see any issues with that, being that that also will not be visible. The opening will remain on the front of the building with a new replacement door placed in that space. The current plans show a colonial revival kind of door with a fan light. So staff would recommend that that fan light be removed and come back for staff approval once a final door is selected. The applicant is agreeable to that. So that's the quick rundown for this project. Obviously, there's more detail in the staff report, and if the board has any further questions, I'm happy to answer those. But in general, staff does recommend that the Historic Conservation Board approve the certificate of appropriateness for 247 Renner Street per plans by Joseph Groh, dated 8/18/2020, including any revisions submitted for permit subject to staff approval with the following conditions: that historically appropriate windows shall be installed on the Renner Street elevation to be approved by staff. 2, the Novik shake shingles proposed for the Mansard roof shall be dark in color to be approved at the staff level. 3, the proposed replacement door shall be submitted to staff for approval without the fan light. And 4, the building permits must be issued within 2 years of the decision date or the COA shall expire.
Thank you. James and Amanda Groh.
Yes, we're here.
What would you like to add that Mr. Owen has not told us?
Well, he covered it very well. I think the only thing that I would really like to add is that.
And Mr. Groh.
Then
Mr.
we'll have to
Groh,
get you sworn in.
Yeah.
Could you just please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear the testimony you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Okay,
Go
so
ahead.
the only thing that I didn't discuss at length with Mr. Owens is that the front door, it's an odd size. The door is there. It's been painted several times. I like to try to preserve as much as possible when I redo these buildings. I've only done a few of them, but it's something I'm very passionate about. So my first step is to strip the paint off the door, see what kind of shape it's in, see if I can reuse the existing door. That's about the only thing that he didn't touch on in there that is part of my plan to go forward.
Okay. As everybody we have signed up on this, do we have questions or comments from the board?
Mr. Owens, I think this looks like a great project. But I am curious, what is the position on asbestos? They say in there you can paint over it and that will contain it. Do we feel comfortable with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's my understanding that an existing asbestos siding is safe as long as it is not damaged to expose any of that dust into the air. So, you know, it's an existing covering on that building now. So as long as it's still in good condition and once it's painted over, that will add that additional layer of protection. So as far as I know, you know, that would be acceptable from a historic standpoint. You know, that could be reviewed more once it gets to the building code review, but I'm not entirely sure about that.
All right. I want to I think this looks like a very nice reuse, but I do want to at least point out, Mr. Owen, that you, by my count, there are at least three different things that you talked about that that the guidelines prohibit. We have a visually a change that is visible from the front of the building. We have a change which is marrying new and old in a way that I'm not at all clear that it's going to be evident where that change is coming from. And then finally, we're being asked to approve vinyl windows. As I say, I like what I've seen of this. I think this is probably the right thing to do, but I would really like some feedback from you, Mr. Owen, on what is it that makes staff comfortable that we're in spite of the guidelines, this is the right way to go.
So staff feels basically that there is some allowance in the guidelines to allow the Historic Conservation Board to take some liberties with these strict interpretations of these guidelines, primarily because this is in that Zone 2 section of the district. So as I called out before, basically that Zone 2 in the guidelines notes that more design latitude will be given to new construction in Zone 2. So I feel that coupled with the specific unique circumstances of this property that really makes it difficult to build an addition in an appropriate location for the guidelines in the rear, that adding to the top in this manner is something that that at least at the staff level we feel comfortable recommending approval for. As far as the Mansard roof goes, that addition won't change the existing facade of the building significantly. It will be visible above the existing cornice, but with the change of materials on the sides as well as the front, I think that there is some room there to say that this is, it will be noticeable as not an original feature of the building. And then as far as the windows go, I know vinyl windows are not typically something that's considered for historic projects, but these guidelines are a little different from most guidelines that outright prohibit that type of material, where it does speak to the fact that the windows are in advanced deterioration. So if key windows are replaced with appropriate materials, there is some leeway for windows that are not on that principal facade.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from the board? Absent that, I will entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the certificate of appropriateness as laid out by staff.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Mr. Zelasco.
Yes.
Ms. Dobbins.
Yes.
Mr. Weiss.
Yes.
Mr. Sunderman.
Yes.
The chair votes no. Item number 3 is approved. Do we have anything else on our agenda? Either Cassandra or Ms. Ahaus?
No, there's no other business on the agenda.
Okay.
We did have the list of January staff approvals for your review.
I'm sorry, say that again?
We did have the January staff approved COAs in your
Right.
packet for approval.
Okay.
I
That's
did
correct.
I did not have that on the agenda. It's always the last meeting of the month.
I did not see those.
Well, we will put that on hold till our next meeting to go through those and approve them, if that's all right.
Yes.
Any other business that we need to deal with right now? Okay, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Don't move.
Second.
All in favor?
I-
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.